What if much of humanity's ancient story isn't just missing from our history books, but actually hidden? Hidden deep beneath the oceans, maybe even under the deserts.
That's the core question we're tackling today, isn't it?
It is. Today, we're doing a deep dive into this pretty extensive report. It's called Ancient Civilizations, Ice Ages, and Climate Dynamics, a paleoclimatological and archaeological synthesis.
Quite a title. But it pulls together a lot of fascinating evidence, archaeological and paleoclimatological, exploring this, well, compelling case for advanced human societies existing during, maybe even before, the last ice age.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack the surprising facts, the arguments that suggest, our traditional picture of early human history might be seriously incomplete.
We potentially hold chapters of, let's say, advanced development waiting under the waves and sands.
Right, and we'll be navigating that tricky intersection of hard scientific data and, well, some very persistent legends. We'll try hard to separate myth from the verifiable stuff.
Absolutely. Need to be clear about what's evidence and what's interpretation or legend.
Okay, so let's pull back the curtain on this intriguing possibility. Where do we start?
Well, to really set the stage for these potentially lost worlds, we have to understand a crucial period. The last glacial maximum, the LGM.
Right, the peak of the last ice age.
Exactly. This wasn't just, a bit chilly. It was roughly 26,000 to 20,000 years ago. Global ice sheets were at their absolute maximum extent.
How cold are we talking?
We're talking global average temperatures about 6 degrees Celsius, that's 11 Fahrenheit, colder than today.
Wow.
And these weren't just polar caps. Massive ice sheets covered 8% of the Earth's entire surface and a full quarter, 25% of the land area, just in the northern hemisphere.
But the really mind-boggling part, the consequence of all that ice was the sea level, isn't it?
That's the key. All that water locked up in ice meant global sea levels plummeted. We're talking approximately 125 meters lower.
125 meters, that's over 400 feet lower than today.
Precisely, imagine that. Vast new coastlines appeared. Land bridges formed connecting lands now separated by sea, all exposed for thousands of years.
So a fundamentally different world map.
Totally different. This changed everything.
Yeah.
Geography, climate, major deserts like the Sahara got even drier. Maybe 90% less rainfall. Tropical rainforests fragmented, split by savannas.
But not everywhere got drier.
No, interestingly, some places got wetter. The western U.S., for example, saw more rain, forming huge pluvial lakes. Think ancient Lake Bonneville in Utah.
Okay.
And the atmosphere itself was different, way dustier, maybe 20 to 25 times dustier than now. Less vegetation, stronger winds, whooping it up.
So the implication for, finding lost history here is just monumental.
Absolutely.
That huge drop in sea level exposed all these vast continental shelves, coastal plains, land bridges, all now deep underwater.
Which
means any human settlements from back then located on those prime coastal areas would now be completely submerged, gone, or at least deeply buried.
erasing a potentially massive chunk of the archaeological record from that specific era.
Yeah, it gives us a solid scientific reason why potential ancient sites are so lost. It makes finding them incredibly hard. You need specialized underwater archaeology.
It's not just fantasy, it's basic geology and climate science, explaining why pieces of our past might literally be drowned.
The planet's geography itself hides the evidence.
That's a good way to put it. The very ground shifted beneath our ancestors' feet. Then the water rose.
Okay, so the LGM created this harsh world, but also potentially hid evidence of who lived there. But people were there, right? Despite the conditions.
Oh, absolutely. Humans were present and, frankly, remarkably adaptable. We're talking about a very, very deep past here.
Deeper than maybe some traditional histories suggest for complex groups.
Definitely. Look at the white sands footprints in New Mexico. Compelling evidence. Human footprints dated between about 23,000 and 21,000 years ago. Right in the LGM.
Wow, in North America that early.
And in Europe, too. We have Gravettian sites. It's a specific Stone Age culture in places like Poland during this cold spell. And ancient DNA, paleogenomics, shows people lived on Beringia.
The land bridge between Asia and North America.
Right. Around 20,000 years ago. They adapted to Arctic conditions there for millennia before moving further into the Americas.
So humans were there, They were surviving, even thriving in some ways, despite these extreme ice age conditions.
Yes.
Which makes you wonder, what did survival look like? And maybe, does it challenge our definition of civilization? Are we looking for more than just farming and cities?
Exactly the question. I mean, look at Paleolithic stone tools. They show this continuous development, increasing complexity over vast timescales. Maybe we've underestimated their cultural sophistication.
And then there's Göbekli Tepe.
Ah, yes, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. The real game changer. Dated to 11,500 years ago, that's what, 9,600 BCE?
Right around there. Monumental structures, huge T-shaped pillars, 50 tons some of them, carved with complex animal figures.
And crucially, built by people we classify as hunter-gatherers, not farmers.
That just blows up the old timeline, doesn't it? The idea that you needed agriculture first, then cities, then monumental building.
Completely. The sheer effort involved, the coordination needed to build Göbekli Tepe, suggests a level of social organization we just didn't attribute to hunter-gatherers before.
So what other kinds of complex societies might have existed that didn't leave cities behind in the way we usually look for them?
It forces a huge rethink. And it gets even more intriguing when you bring in alternative researchers. Graham Hancock, for instance, suggests sites like Göbekli Tepe might reflect influence from, well, a lost advanced knowledge source.
Possibly connected to survivors of an earlier cataclysm.
That's his line of thought, yeah. Maybe even recording the Younger Dryas event we'll talk about later. Jimmy Corsetti sees it as clear evidence of a sophisticated civilization that was essentially wiped out.
And Corsetti also points to Baalbek, right? In Lebanon?
Yes, those absolutely enormous stone blocks, some weighing 1,000 tons.
1,000 tons. That's like 15 times heavier than the big blocks in the Great Pyramid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Corsetti argues that level of quarrying and precision moving exceeds known Roman capabilities, suggesting they might be much older. Prehistoric construction, maybe 11,000 years old, again pointing towards some lost advanced capability.
Okay, so if these complex societies, maybe proto-civilizations, existed, where's all the evidence? Which brings us back to the underwater idea, the invisible archaeological record.
Precisely. Remember those exposed land masses during the LGM sea level drop? Sundaland, connecting Southeast Asia,
Yeah.
and Beringia connecting to North America. These weren't just barren lands, they were likely prime spots for human settlement, key migration routes.
And we do have some hints, some actual finds from these now submerged areas.
We do. Little glimpses, like Homo erectus skull fragments dated to 140,000 years ago, found in the Madura Strait, now underwater between Indonesian islands.
140,000 years ago.
And even older evidence, maybe 500,000 years old, of tool use and shell engravings from Sundaland.
It really feels like we're just scratching the surface quite literally sometimes.
And Grant Hancock claims he's actually found potential ruins and structures on some of these submerged continental shelves. He argues there's a huge missing chapter of human history down there.
The massive challenge, of course, is exploring it. Underwater archaeology is incredibly difficult, incredibly expensive.
Yeah, it is. But these submerged landscapes, these lost worlds, they represent maybe the most critical frontier for potentially revolutionary discoveries about our deep past.
But about the very origins of what we call civilization.
Yeah, and this naturally leads us into that fascinating zone where science and legend seem to blur. What about those famous legendary lost civilizations?
Right, like Atlantis. You can't talk about this stuff without talking about Atlantis.
Plato's story, yeah.
Okay.
A powerful naval empire rules the West, then catastrophic earthquakes and floods, submerged more than 9,000 years before Plato's time.
So over 11,000 years ago from our perspective, how do researchers today try to connect this legend to actual geology or locations?
Well, there are many theories. Randall Carlson, for example, looks at Plato's Pillars of Hercules. He interprets that as the Straits of Gibraltar.
Okay, the entrance to the Mediterranean.
Right, and suggests the Azores Plateau out in the Atlantic could be a candidate for Atlantis' location. He points out the timing Plato gives, roughly 11,600 years ago, aligns pretty well with periods of catastrophic sea level rise after the Ice Age melt.
Interesting alignment. What about Jimmy Corsetti's idea?
Corsetti takes that timing, 9,600 BC or 11,600 years ago, and links it directly to the end of the Younger Dryas cataclysms, giving a very specific geological window for Atlantis' destruction.
And his proposed location is pretty radical.
Very. He proposes the Richat structure in Mauritania, the so-called Eye of the Sahara.
The Eye of the Sahara, that's deep in the desert now. How does that fit with the sunken island?
Well, that's the thing. It requires a dramatically different past climate. But what's fascinating is that Randall Carlson has also looked closely at the Sahara using satellite imagery like Google Earth.
And he sees evidence of water.
Massive water erosion. He identifies clear fluvial striations, basically, grooves carved by huge amounts of flowing water across the region. He suggests a mega-scale flood event may be linked to an ocean impact causing immense rainfall.
Wow.
And the Richard structure itself. Geological evidence shows it was associated with the lake and significant flooding back in that period. The geology indicates huge amounts of material were scoured out by water.
So maybe not a sunken island, but a coastal city destroyed by cataclysmic floods linked to climate shifts.
That's one way to interpret it through that lens, yes. Graham Hancock adds another layer, speculating about an advanced Ice Age civilization destroyed by comet impacts around 12,900 years ago.
The start of the Younger Dryas.
Exactly. He thinks survivors spread out, carried knowledge that seeded later civilizations, and that global flood myths are echoes, cultural memories of that cataclysm.
Okay, let's shift continents. What about the legendary city of Dwaraka in India?
Dwaraka. Deeply rooted in Hindu tradition, the city Lord Krishna, said to have been submerged by the sea after his departure.
And there have been actual underwater finds there, right?
Yes, quite significant ones. Underwater archaeology near Bet Dwarka, mostly in the 80s, uncovered lots of artifacts. Submerged remains too, what looks like a fortified foundation, stone blocks, pillars, maybe irrigation system.
The possible fort structure,
A
too.
very derg, yeah, described as possibly built to manage or stop water. And lots of stone anchors, suggesting it was a major port city involved in trade.
The really controversial part is the dating.
It is. Some carbon-dated wood pieces recovered from the site have yielded dates way back, around 7500 BCE. That's 9,500 years ago.
9,500 years ago, if that's linked to a city.
It would drastically push back the timeline for urban civilization in that region, which mainstream archaeology usually places much later, maybe around 4000 BCE. Some other debris has also been dated to that very early period.
So what's the consensus? Is it accepted as a 9,500-year-old city?
Well, that's where it gets complex. There is compelling evidence of ancient settlement, and some dates do point very early. However, other archaeological evidence from the same area points to later periods, closer to 4,000 years ago, around 2000 BCE.
So multiple layers of occupation, or disagreement on what the dates mean.
Both, really. Some researchers argued the earlier dates represent habitation that was then engulfed by the sea much later, maybe around 4,000 years ago. Others stick to the idea of a much older city linked directly to the legend. So the existence of ancient submerged structures is clear, but the precise age and its direct correlation to the legendary Dwaraka of 9,500 years ago is still debated.
It really highlights the challenge of linking ancient texts and legends directly to archaeological finds, especially underwater ones with complex layers.
Exactly. Different lines of evidence sometimes tell different stories, or at least stories that are hard to perfectly align.
Okay, this whole discussion, especially the potential cataclysms mentioned with Atlantis, it often seems to converge on one specific dramatic event in Earth's recent past, the Younger Dryas.
Ah, yes, the Younger Dryas. A truly pivotal period. We're talking about roughly 12,900 to 11,600 years ago.
And what was it? It wasn't just a gradual change.
No, not at all. It was a dramatic, abrupt return to near glacial conditions, particularly in the northern hemisphere. And it happened right in the middle of a warming trend, as the planet was coming out of the last ice age. It was like hitting a climatic speed bump, a huge global hiccup.
A massive reversal. What caused it?
Well, the standard explanation involves meltwater from the North American ice sheets disrupting ocean currents. But there's a compelling, if controversial, alternative theory.
The impact hypothesis.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Championed by people like Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock. They proposed the Younger Dryas cooling was triggered by a cosmic impact, a fragmented comet or asteroid exploding in the atmosphere or hitting the surface.
What's the evidence they point to for such a dramatic event?
They cite a layer of microscopic debris found right at the Younger Dryas boundary, across multiple continents. Things like nanodiamonds, tiny metallic and carbon spheres, spikes in iridium and platinum elements, often associated with extraterrestrial impacts.
Right, those impact markers.
Plus charcoal and soot layers, suggesting widespread wildfires, and these distinctive black mats of sediment found across North America at that boundary layer.
And Hancock has a specific idea about the source.
He suggests the torrid meteor stream, proposing that Earth passed through a particularly dense debris field from that stream around 12,800 years ago, leading to multiple impacts or airbursts.
And Carlson connects this impact directly to those megafloods we talked about earlier.
Yes, he argues the impact possibly hitting an ocean or the ice sheet itself, could have vaporized immense amounts of water, leading to prolonged catastrophic rainfall and carving those features like the fluvial striations in the Sahara. He sees similar erosion patterns in Saudi Arabia, India too.
So if this impact hypothesis holds, the effect on human societies at the time would have been devastating.
Immense. Think about it. Human groups were already adapting to the end of the Ice Age, the deglaciation. Then suddenly, bam, abrupt, severe climate change, widespread fires, massive floods. It would have caused unimaginable stress, forced migrations, competition for scarce resources.
And as Corsetti points out, if sophisticated sites like Göbekli Tepe already existed just before this,
Then the Younger Dryas impact offers a potential mechanism for the obliteration of such early advanced cultures, leaving only fragmented evidence and maybe those persistent legends of cataclysm.
it really underscores how vulnerable societies can be to sudden, large-scale environmental shocks, whether from space or from Earth's own systems.
Absolutely, it connects celestial events, ice sheets, oceans, climate, and human history in a very dramatic way.
Speaking of dramatic environmental shifts, let's pivot to another incredible transformation: the Sahara Desert. It wasn't always a desert.
Not at all. Hard to picture now, but during what's called the African humid period, roughly 8,700 down to about 4,300 years ago, the Sahara was green, lush, fertile.
A green Sahara. That's a complete geographical makeover. What's the evidence for that?
Pretty solid evidence. Things like stalagmite samples from caves in Morocco show periods of significantly higher rainfall back then. This replenished underground aquifers made rivers flow across areas that are now hyper-arid desert.
What caused the greening?
Primarily, increased rainfall from tropical weather systems and the West African monsoon pushing much further north, deeper into the Sahara than it does today.
And the screening obviously had a huge impact on people living there.
Absolutely. This transformation allowed for the rise and spread of Neolithic pastoralist societies, herders. It made movement across the Sahara much easier, facilitating cultural exchange. The desert barrier essentially shrank or even disappeared in places.
And Graham Hancock again suggests there might be more hidden there.
He does. He argues the Sahara is vastly underserved by archaeology and speculates that thousands of pyramids or other structures could still be buried under the sand, hinting at more lost civilizations from that greener period, or perhaps even earlier ones revealed when the climate was different.
Wow, it just challenges our whole perception of these major geographical features as being static, permanent.
Exactly. It highlights just how dynamic Earth's climate history really is.
Yeah.
And it gives us this long-term perspective on environmental change, resilience, vulnerability, valuable lessons as we face our own future climate shifts.
It makes you wonder, what other landscapes that seem permanent today have undergone similar massive transformations, potentially hiding even more of our deep past?
That's the question, isn't it?
So, wrapping this up for today, we've taken quite a journey, a real deep dive into evidence that honestly compels us to rethink ancient history.
From the huge global shifts of the last glacial maximum, the potential cataclysm of the Younger Dryas, to the Sahara's green past, it's clear climate has been a massive force shaping the human story.
Yeah, and we've seen how specific archaeological sites, like Göbekli Tepe, like Baalbek, really challenge our conventional ideas about early human complexity. When did civilization really begin, and what did it look like?
And how legends, like Atlantis, like Dwaraka, might actually hold echoes, distorted perhaps, but echoes of real pre-Ice Age events or societies, with tantalizing bits of evidence now being found, especially under the sea.
So, thinking about all this, what stands out most to you listening to this exploration, this ongoing scientific quest, this search for our deep history? It really shows that huge parts of our story are still hidden, under the waves, under the sands.
Definitely. And as our technology gets better, as we develop new ways to explore these submerged and buried landscapes, deep-sea subs, ground-penetrating radar, LiDAR,
Right, all these new tools.
what more are we going to discover? What new chapters will be added to the human story?
And maybe how might understanding these ancient lost worlds, understanding how people adapted to those massive past environmental shifts, how might that inform us today as we face our own challenges with climate change and environmental instability?
It speaks volumes about human resilience, adaptability, but also vulnerability.
Absolutely. The search for these missing chapters continues. It really invites all of us to keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep an open mind about just how deep and complex our shared past might be.